So welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Considering an Electric Vehicle and Advice for Older Drivers. As I've said, my name is Rob Hurd and I'm the chair and founder of the Older Drivers Forum. I will be looking after the question and answers later on today in this presentation. So a little background on me. I'm a retired police officer. I was in the police for 30 years and 26 of them was a roads policing officer, and I retired as the road safety sergeant for Hampshire and Thames Valley Police. So it just gives you got some knowledge on roads policing. First thing I'm going to do is just play you a short video. This video basically is from Valerie Singleton. Now, many of you will have known of Valerie Singleton before. She's a well-known presenter. Valerie is trusted and well-known journalist, travel writer and TV presenter. And many of you will remember her from her time on Blue Peter. And who will never forget that time when she was basically looking after as well with John Noakes, that little baby elephant that was causing chaos across the studio. Val is a keen supporter of older drivers and is being one herself, has recently worked with an organization called GEM Motoring Assist to help promote driving into older age. So what I'm going to do is just play the video with you. So I'll just open it for a second. You should get the video coming up. Let me just hold on a second. And we'll start the video for you.
Hello, we're delighted that you can join today's webinar. This webinar is just one of several webinars taking place this week, hosted by the Older Drivers Forum. Each webinar is on a different subject and designed to help and support you to carry on driving safely for longer. This week of webinars is to support the Project Edward Week of Action titled Fit for the Road. Project Edward stands for Every Day Without a Road Death, and it's an annual UK-wide campaign for road safety. It's backed by government, the emergency services, highways agencies, road safety organisations and British businesses. Shockingly, on average, 5 people a day are killed and around 150,000 people are injured each year on roads in Great Britain. Unfortunately, 20% of all deaths on our roads are older people. As older licence holders is increasing every year, fatalities for drivers aged 70 and over are forecast to increase by 22% by 2040. As an older driver myself, I am fully aware how we can't become complacent about our abilities. We all need to focus on our own road safety and making sure that we are fit for the road, not only to protect ourselves, but others. This week of webinars, I hope will give you lots of useful information and help us all become safer road users while supporting us to carry on driving safely for longer. I wish you all the very best and please stay safe.
Well, thank you, Valerie, for that. And it's really great to have Valerie Singleton supporting us for this. And if you'd like to see Valerie actually live on our webinars, we're running one on Thursday where she's hosting one on dash cams with me, so you can actually see and ask Valerie live questions as well. So let's move on now. We're going to move on to our 3 speakers for today. Our first speaker, who's hosting this as well, is Nigel Lloyd-Jones. Nigel is the co-leader of the Older Drivers Forum for Gloucestershire. He also worked for the Police and Crime Commissioner for Gloucestershire as a priority lead for road safety. He's had 37 years as career in marketing communications, specialising in the pan-European automotive industry. Nigel has also been involved in the electric vehicle technology since 2008, with the launch of the Opel or Vauxhall Ampera. Our next speaker is County Councillor Steve Foster from Hampshire County Council. Steve has an expertise through the experience of having driven over 250,000 miles in electric vehicles. Wow. He is also a consultant for Osprey, one of the leading electric vehicle charging networks. He advises countries around the world in developing their charging network strategy and is part of a consumer trial group for Millbrook Vehicle Testing Centre in development of advanced driving assistance systems. Rich Jones is the managing director of JEC Electrical. He specializes in installing private and business charge points, and he has also driven EV vehicles or electric vehicles for nearly 7 years. Recently, he has supported his 80-year-old father in transition to an electric vehicle technology. So we're about to move on to our speakers. Just a few facts. Recently, Admiral Insurance research showed that 52% of all motorists considered buying an electric vehicle next year. 55% of motorists will make the switch in the next 5 years, which really does show from your results from the polls as well. And also, we know that by 2030, there will be a ban on sales of new petrol and diesel cars. So this makes this presentation today even more relevant. So I'm going to hand over to them and welcome you to Nigel, Richard, and Steve.
Right, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Rob. So I'll just now share our screen. There we go. And hopefully, Rob, you're seeing an emoji. Yeah, maybe not.
Yes, I can. Yes, that's fine.
You can. Fantastic. I've actually, sadly, it has, there we go, technology as it goes. Unfortunately, my PowerPoint has frozen. So just bear with me for a second. Let's go again. Okay. Right, we're off. We're in business. Fantastic. So good morning, everyone. And my name's Nigel Lloyd-Jones. I hope what you hear today will be very helpful. Apologies if I'm a little bit echoey, but nevertheless, I hope you will hear me clearly. So we are at a momentous time in terms of car ownership. Industry observers suggest cars will change more in the next 5 to 10 years than they have in the last 50. And electric vehicles, EVs, are leading this revolution. Now, there are already groundbreaking EVs available that demonstrate the technological advances that are setting the new norm in car ownership. By 2030, most car manufacturers forecast that 40% of their sales will be EVs. And Toyota and VW are leading the way with a target of 70%. Now, whilst we may not be an EV driver now, we will be in the future. So we need to be prepared. So next, self-disclosure. I am 67. So when I talk about older drivers, I will talk about it in the first person, as I consider myself to be part of this road user group. Now, whilst I've been involved in EV technology on a professional basis since 2008, I am now in the process of transitioning to my first personal EV. So like a lot of you, I'm going through the same research and thought process. Now, further self-disclosure is that none of us panelists have an affiliation with any car brand. But I am grateful, though, to the car manufacturers' press departments from whom I'm sourced the imagery to illustrate our presentation. So, as we've just been hearing from Rob, the EV ownership revolution is well and truly underway in the UK. The RAC estimate that in April, there were 1.2 million EVs on our roads today. Battery electric vehicles, BEVs, sales for the year to date are up 107% in comparison to 2020. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, PHEVs, our sales have shown an even bigger rise, up 144%. And combined EV sales in this period record the highest market share to date at 15%. What this means is that 1 in every 6 new cars that's being registered is an EV. Now, research also confirmed the highest proportion of drivers ever, 19%, saying their next car will be an EV. And this is the first time this figure exceeded a choice of a diesel vehicle. And it's estimated by 2030, there will be 12 million EVs on our roads. Now, this revolution is driving the development in the EV charging network that has been one of the main barriers in the past to EV ownership. The government has set a target of 2.3 million public chargers by 2030. So let me introduce you to one of these new EV owners. This is my fellow panelist, Rich Jones, 80-year-old father, Tony, with his Kia e-Niro plug-in hybrid. Now, he's really happy, as you'll be hearing, with how simple it's been to transition to this new technology and finds it driving it a breeze. Now, this is the point. What we all wanted to make from the outset of the webinar. Whilst in the explanation, some aspects of EV ownership might sound complicated, in the real world, and as Tony Jones discovered, it really isn't. Now, inevitably, it's a bit of a technical subject, but we'll do our best to keep the jargon to a minimum. And if you're making notes, a reminder that, as what Rob said, that this webinar is being recorded, so you can review it again later if you want to check again anything we've said. So let's first take a look at the different types of EV technology that are now available. First are the battery electric vehicles, BEVs. Now, popular models of the Nissan Leaf, that's been on sale since 2010. Now, these drive purely on electric power provided by a plug-in rechargeable battery. Further, recharging on the move is provided by a regenerative braking system. Now, this system captures kinetic energy during deceleration, storing it in the battery. Now, this regenerative braking system is separate to the conventional braking system. Next, there are plug-in hybrid vehicles, PHEVs, and a bestseller is the Mitsubishi Outlander. Now, these have smaller plug-in rechargeable battery and an internal combustion engine, either a petrol or diesel. Now, PHEVs can run for short distances, that's between 15 to 30 miles, on purely electric power. And when the battery is depleted or the driver decides to change modes, the engine provides the drive power. Further, recharge capacity is also provided by regenerative braking. Now, to maximize the electric capability of PHEVs, owners need to ensure they plug in and recharge on a regular, if not daily basis. PHEVs are more suited for those who have limited local EV charging facilities or who have more unpredictable lifestyles that require longer journeys at short notice, which might make it difficult to plan when to recharge. Research identified that 56% of drivers are more likely to opt for a PHEV as an intermediate step before going full electric. Then there are hybrid vehicles, HEVs. Now, these are like PHEVs, but cannot be plugged in to recharge. The most famous is the Toyota Prius that became the go-to vehicle for Hollywood movie stars wishing to show their green credentials. HEVs have even smaller batteries and have an even shorter electric-only drive capability. Now, manufacturers will transition away from HEVs and eventually PHEVs as a battery capacity and range increases and the charging network becomes universal. Now, as Rob said, all hybrids will be banned from sale in the UK from 2035. Now, you may also have seen mild hybrids advertised. Now, these are not EVs in the practical sense, as they have very small battery pack designed to improve efficiency, but can never run on electric power only. Now, currently, the average age of petrol cars on our roads is 9 years. Anyone making the transition to an EV will very probably be engaging in new technologies that they've never experienced before. Also, they'll be engaging for the first time in the unique qualities of owning and driving an EV. Okay, let's now look at the positives and some of the common concerns of EV ownership, the pros and the cons. First, the pros. Wow, EVs are great fun to drive. They have effortless performance as a characteristic of electric motors that peak pulling power, torque, is available from a standstill, and this high torque also makes for effortless overtaking. EVs are also easy to drive as they're only automatic. EVs are also very calming and comfortable for all the car's occupants. The interiors are free of clutter with minimum of switchgear. The vehicles are more spacious in area as the compact battery and drivetrain enable designers to create more passenger space. And on the move, they're effortless, refined cruisers with significantly less noise and vibration than a petrol or diesel car. Now, many are also equipped with comfort features previously only available in premium vehicles. And for example, the ability in the winter to remotely de-ice and preheat the interior before getting in the car. How wonderful that would be. Now, a much publicized benefit is how cheap they are to run. We're going to talk a lot about that later. Also much publicized are the environmental benefits of zero tail emissions. Now, we agree that driving an EV will contribute to improve the air quality where you drive in electric mode, especially in urban areas. But to fully deliver on the reduction and overall carbon impact, owners must choose a green energy supplier who generates electricity from a renewable source, such as solar or wind power. Manufacturers must also achieve carbon neutral, overall carbon neutral in the manufacturing and recycling process in the car's life cycle, which they're all committed to deliver. So, for example, BMW have just revealed their iVision, which is built almost entirely from recyclable material. Now, EVs are also big on safety. They come with a maximum 5-star in the Euro NCAP crash tests and are equipped with the very latest safety technologies. They're also proven to be very dependable. A recent What Car survey reported hybrids were rated as the most reliable of all engine types, with an average class reliability score of 96.9%. Now, BEVs also gave a good showing with an average score of 92.9%. Okay, those are the main pros, which are, what about the common concerns of EV ownership? Now, Admiral Insurance recently completed research on EV ownership, which revealed the 4 biggest concerns were as follows. First is the high purchase price of a new EV, plus the cost to install a home electric charging point if it's practical to do so. Then there is the much debated range anxiety. This is exacerbated by the third concern, doubts about there being an adequate charging network if the owner does not have a home charger or is going on a longer journey. The fourth are concerns about battery life and the fear of a high cost of replacement. However, there are 2 further concerns that we'd like to flag up, which are less well publicized, but are highly relevant to us older drivers. These are low awareness of our road user group of the technology we're about to engage with. Department for Transport research revealed that 70% of drivers over 75 had low awareness of technologies such as advanced driving assistance systems, ADS, which are now fitted to most EVs. This was most evident with older female drivers, some of who never learnt to use ADS, even though they'd paid for the systems and they were fitted in their car. This is then exacerbated by inadequate training provided by many car dealers. FIA European research revealed most drivers do not receive sufficient training on new technologies and must rely on information from their car manual and a trial and error approach. Not very satisfactory. Now, we also have anecdotal evidence of car sales consultants turning off systems in test drives with older drivers to avoid confusing them. Now, this is particularly concerning as more and more of these safety systems become legal requirements or on which the car's safety rating is judged. Okay, so our agenda going forward is going to be as follows. We're going to examine those concerns around EV ownership and dispel some of the myths. And then we're going to take you on a virtual EV drive experience to give you insights on what they're like to drive and to give advice about the new technologies that you'll be engaging with. And this is going to draw on Steve's extensive experience of EV driving That's the equivalent of 10 times around the globe. We're also going to suggest how to best prepare for a transition to EVs. And then we're going to conclude with a case history, and Rich and I are going to chat about his experience in helping his father to become an EV driver. So let us now look at some of the concerns of EV ownership. And here I'd like to bring in my fellow panelist, Steve Forrest. So Steve, how do you view the concerns about the high cost of new car EV purchase?
Thanks, Nigel. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to share some of the experience I've had and my passion around the subject. Concern about the price of new EVs is reflected in RAC research and many others. RAC research showed 78% of motorists feel new EVs are too expensive to purchase. But what we can now see coming down the line is an absolute avalanche of less expensive mass market EVs. The current least expensive EVs are the Renault Zoe, the Smart EQ for 2, the Volkswagen e-up, that's my northern accent by the way, and the Mini Electric. Volkswagen have just revealed their smallest EV to date, which is going to be on the market fairly shortly. It's called the ID Life, with a target price of around £17,000, brand new. And it's not a tiny little car. It's a full-size, 4-door, 4-seat, or even 5-seat car. Looks absolutely amazing. In a few years' time, we'll have many more EVs coming to market. Chinese EV brands such as NIO and China Wall that you may not have heard of. They'll be arriving on the market. You might have more recognizable names, but those manufacturers turn out amazing products that will drive down prices even further. One of the Chinese brands at the moment is MG, and their cars are already very high spec, very competitively priced. All these less expensive EVs benefit from government support with a low emission vehicle grant. That pays up to 35% with a maximum of £2,500 on vehicles costing less than £35,000. So it's a sizable grant to get £2,500. Industry observers also believe we're reaching a tipping point for more affordable private ownership, with more and more second-hand EVs coming on the market. If you're keen to make a quick transition to EVs, second-hand might be the way to go. There's a backlog of new car sales due to the global shortage of semiconductor chips that new technology requires. And it's notable that for a lot of new cars, you might have to wait 6 or even 12 months. If you go second-hand, obviously, you can shortcut that. The availability of second-hand EVs is powered by the escalating switch to electric by fleet car buyers, who are responsible for over half new car purchases. For them and for their employees, there are benefits in reduction of the carbon footprint, the running costs, and the tax benefits charge. For those fortunate enough to get a company car, the company car tax on an EV is 1% versus 24% for any car with a CO2 rating of over 100, and that's most cars on the road. Those benefits are utterly compelling, particularly for those who drive high mileages. It's interesting that Admiral Insurance has created an online tool which highlights average second-hand EV costs and postcode availability of popular second-hand EVs. But there are more and more coming on the market now. There are second-hand EVs available from around £5,000, including even the first generation Nissan Leafs, which are fantastic cars. If more funds are available than that sort of bottom entry point of £5,000, what you will find is that you can get more range and newer, higher quality capability cars, such as the Golf E, which typically starts from around £14,000 second-hand, the Hyundai Ioniq Electric around £15,000. At the top end of the market, things like the second-hand Tesla Model S are also now becoming available for around £30,000. However, bear in mind that as a potential owner, you may well have to travel a bit further to secure your EV of choice due to the fact that there are still a relative small number on the market compared to fossil fuel vehicles. In many respects, buying a second-hand EV is like buying a second-hand car, with a prospective buyer needing to think about the age, the mileage, the overall condition, the price, the depreciation, the overall running cost. The one major difference is the battery condition, which we'll talk about a bit later. If you're thinking of buying a Nissan Leaf or a Renault Zoe, one of the earlier ones, one thing I would check is whether the battery is owned or leased, because on some of the early cars, you didn't buy the battery at the same time as the car, and therefore you have to pay a monthly cost, a monthly lease for the battery, and that's for the entire duration that you want to keep it. So be aware of that. If you're doing small mileages, that can work out quite expensive. You want to potentially avoid those additional monthly charges. When we're considering a higher purchase price of an EV, you've got to consider it in context of the overall lower whole life costs of EV ownership versus a petrol or a diesel car. The lower costs for EV are, first of all, the lower energy costs of running on electricity rather than topping up with petrol or diesel. You can maximize that if you've got an economy 7 or an off-peak power for your charging. For example, one of the major energy suppliers, E.ON, is now offering electric vehicle owners an off-peak tariff of 4p for each unit of electricity used. That's around 90% less than the normal 16.6p rate. Difficult to put that into context. Let me just explain. On 4p of energy, you'll probably travel around 4 miles. So it's a penny a mile if you're on that low cost electricity. And that is amazing value for money. It means over 2,000 EV driven miles, it would cost just £20 of electricity. In comparison, for diesel, around £223, £249 for petrol. So 1/10 of the cost. If you're doing a lot of miles, that really makes a difference. If you currently run a petrol car, make sure to take account for increases in fuel costs if your car can't run on the new E10 green fuel. One of my neighbours was complaining to me the other day. He filled up at a petrol station. It wasn't £1.35 per litre advertised. It was £1.52 per litre because his car wouldn't run on this new E10. I did advise him to buy an EV, and actually he's gone looking. I urge users to make use of free electricity available at courtesy charging points that are appearing at supermarkets, at garden centres, at cinemas, and so many more. It's one of the new habits that EV owners quickly get used to. You might, when you're grazing, as it's called, just grabbing a quick charge, only add 20 or 30 miles whilst to the shop, but it's enough to get home or wherever you're going next. For some people, it's even a week's mileage. It takes 20 seconds to plug in and then carry on with your day. The inconvenience of having to make a specific stop or an extra drive just to visit a petrol station where you buy expensive Kit Kats has gone. This is cheap motoring. Manufacturers like Vauxhall are also offering 30,000 miles of free electricity as part of their purchase package. It's always worth watching out for these sort of offers, whether it's from Volkswagen, Citroën, Tesla, whoever. They're incredibly attractive. Importantly, for battery electric vehicles, there are also much lower maintenance costs as there are fewer moving parts. An electric motor has one moving part. Many fewer accessories, and that also helps with reliability. And servicing. BMW Mini charges £10 a month for a service agreement on a Mini Electric compared to £14 a month for a petrol Mini Cooper. That adds up over a 3 or 4 year ownership life. On many other cars, the cost of servicing for an electric, like my Hyundai Kona, is about £80 compared to £300 or £400 for a full service normally. Remember that BEVs are still required to take an MOT, but there's no need for an emission test. They'll pass that. There's zero road tax for EVs up to a value of the vehicle of £40,000. In some cities, there's a reduced charge or even free EV parking, like in Westminster. In London, there's no congestion charge to be paid. They're exempt. Outside the capital, there are no charges in the new clean air zones that have recently been given the green light at countries through the country. Sorry, cities through the country. Concerning insurance costs, recent results from Compare the Market show EV premiums are dropping below that of petrol or diesel, possibly because EVs are being bought by older drivers with lower claims rates. The average insurance cost in July for a Golf E was just under £500, as against £870 for a standard Golf. Depreciation values are also stabilising. CAP, who are one of the main market research companies or valuation companies, their guide says the EV sector has become a two-speed market, with cheaper used EVs, such as the Renault Zoe, actually rising in value now, while premium models, such as the Tesla and Model X, are actually still falling. The latter reflects a similar scenario with a second-hand market for premium petrol or diesel cars. The newer, more efficient vehicles are the ones that are really in demand. So if you're concerned about the high purchase cost of an EV, you need to work through and calculate all these factors I referred to in the context of the services where you live and your driving life. From this, you'll get a true picture of how the higher cost potentially of a purchase of an EV is often offset by the lower overall cost of ownership, especially if you're doing high mileages. A further cost with EVs is the installation of a home charging point, if it's practical to put one in. It's not a high cost, but it's something to bear in mind. We'll talk about that later. Recent research reported 18 million out of the 27.6 million households have the space to create a charging bay at home. The government, in its long-term strategy document, The Road to Zero, said it wanted all new homes and offices to have charge points. That's going to become law. I'll hand back now to Nigel to talk with our fellow panellist, Rich Jones.
Steve, thanks very much. So Rich, your company has installed something like over 1,500 charge points at businesses and homes. So you've got immense experience. So what's the kind of average cost to install a home charger? And how does the government help in that?
Okay, yeah. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here. So typically, the average cost of an EV charge put in the home is around £950, including VAT. Now, that's going to vary a little bit depending on the manufacturer of the charge point and the kind of installation. Some installations are more difficult than others. So it's quite a lot of money, but there is a bit of help from the government. The government will contribute up to 75% of the cost of the installation for up to 2 cars, if you've got 2 cars. And yeah, so that brings it down to approximately £600, including VAT, which is still a lot of money. But what I would say is what you're creating is your own filling station at your home. So as Steve was saying, you don't have to spend a journey to go to a petrol station ever again if you've got an EV, or very rarely if you've got a PHEV. And like they also said, if you get a renewable energy supplier, you'll have an eco filling station. So it's good for the environment too.
Yeah. So what kind of qualifications you had to get this government grant?
Yeah, well, to qualify the person applying for the grant, you need to have either bought, lease, or ordered an EV, qualifying EV, or if you're a company user, you have to have a dedicated sole use of that EV for up to 6 months. And then you'll also need to have off-road parking at your property. And then your vehicle will need to qualify on the OLEV scheme, or OZEV if they've now decided to call it. In reality, all BEVs, battery electric vehicles, will qualify, and the vast majority of PHEVs will qualify. And then you'll also need an O-level, OZEV approved installer to do that for you. This installer, so the cost of that grant is done for you. That cost will be taken off. So what happens is I would take off that cost, so you'll pay 600, and then your installer will claim that back off the government. I will add one thing, however, that's changing. At the end of March 2022, that grant is going. So the EV8 grant, which is the Electric Vehicle Home Scheme, is changing, and it's transitioning to help the people without the parking space on their properties. So this is going to go to things like social housing, apartment blocks, landlords, etc. Like, I've had some first details, all the fine details are going to be finalised, but I think for a big apartment block, it's up to £30,000. So that's what they're doing. They're transitioning the grants.
Fantastic, thank you. We hear a lot about different types of chargers. So I get very confused about it. What would you recommend, and how much mileage do you actually get from the different chargers? Okay,
yeah, good question. So in reality, there's inside the charge point itself, there are 3 different types you can deal with. But in reality, the one you'll be looking at in the vast majority of houses will be what we call a 7 kilowatt charge point. You can get a 3.4, which is good enough for a PHEV, and you can get a 22 kilowatt, which very few people in the country can have that. So we're concentrating on a 7.2 kilowatt charge point. That will give you approximately, if you plug in for 1 hour, that will give you 25 miles of range, roughly, for a BEV, full electric vehicle, and for a plug-in hybrid, approximately half of that, 13 miles. The reason for that is the inverter, which converts the energy on a B. There's not, you've got the engine as well, I see, so it's not the room. So that's that. So that's what you're going to get, is approximately a 7 kilowatt charge point, going to give you 25 miles an hour. Now, the biggest choice that you'll have to make is whether you have a tethered unit or a socketed unit. Now, a tethered unit is where the ones you see with the cable already attached with the plug on. So all you've got to do is tap your thing, plug it in, and on your way. That's what I recommend to the vast majority of homeowners. Now, some people do prefer a socket-only version for various reasons. Some people don't like the look of them, even though the cables are quite neat and tidy, but they're still there. Some people also like the flexibility to have maybe a longer lead. Now, typically, a tethered unit will come with a 5-meter lead. They can have 6.5 or 7.5. Some have 8, but typically about 5. Now, with a socketed version, you can buy your own leads. Now, you can get 10 meters, you can get 20 meters, but I probably wouldn't recommend them. No. Now, another thing to consider on that note, with the leads and everything, is the, so by the way, sorry, I always recommend a tethered unit because you don't want the inconvenience of getting a cable out of the boot when it's raining on a February evening, your shopping's in the back, just want to grab your plug and shove it in. Now, there are some hybrid units we're doing now, which you can actually, with a socket, very neat little unit, which you can actually plug a unit in, a lead into it, so it's permanent, so you can have it tethered or untethered. And the last thing to consider with the charge point is where the charge point is positioned. Now, it's very important to put it in the right place, as you would a filling station, so it's most convenient for you, no hassle, but it equally as important, it's in a safe place. So, for example, don't put your charge point one side of the door and your car the other, so you go across the door. Don't put it across steps. Common sense, but just be careful.
Fantastic advice. You mentioned there about the rain. Are there any issues to do with, wet weather and charging? Electricity sounds a little bit dangerous to me.
Well, nothing to worry about there. Obviously, any charge point installed, sold in this country, particularly OZEV approved charge points, but in reality, any charge point is going to be designed for this weather. They all have what we would call an IP rating, which is the kind of waterproof or dustproof factor. I think the minimum, offhand, is IP44, but in reality, the minimum I've ever seen is IP54. So they're designed for anything that the British weather can chuck at them. And also, as an extra bit of insurance, any OZEV approved EV charge point has to offer a 3-year warranty. So it's a little bit more protection for you.
Fantastic. Rich, thanks very much indeed. Look forward to coming back to you a little bit later. Okay, so we're going to move on now, and I'm going to look at the often thorny subject of range anxiety. Now, this has been a concern from the first arrival of EVs on the market, and despite vastly improved battery technology, remains a concern for many. Now, recent research by Volvo in July reported that 58% of drivers say range anxiety is a major barrier to EV purchase. However, most people, their average daily car journey is only 20 miles. And I sense range anxiety often gets overemphasized by journalists who tend to take long journeys in writing their reviews, which doesn't reflect most of our day-to-day driving patterns. Now, the short distance we drive is even more of a factor for us older drivers. We only drive on average just over 2,000 miles a year. That's less than 40 miles a week. And that means we would only have to recharge once a month. Now, how do you find out what is the true range of an EV? Now, on your screen, you can see now is some recent research about some popular EVs. In the first column, you can see the WLTP range claim. So that's the official figures. In the next column are figures achieved by journalists in day-to-day driving. And then, as you can see, the deviation from the official figures. Now, this data reflects a very similar disparity between official and real world figures for petrol cars. But what I hope that you can really take from this is that it really should be reassuring that in relation to most drivers' day-to-day mobility needs, and particularly for older drivers, that EVs have a sufficient range. But there are also many ways that we drivers can influence the range. And this includes using the different driving modes that are available in an EV car. Now, if we take the example of a Vauxhall Corsa E, this offers a sports mode, a normal mode, and an eco mode. Now, the journalist writing about it said the instant response in sports mode can get quite addictive. But if you use it regularly, it will dramatically reduce driving range. Now, in a recent Car Magazine report, the Corsa E in normal mode in comparison to sports mode returned 40% more efficient, and that turned to a very acceptable 195-mile range. Now, you might ask, what about the eco mode, Nigel? Shouldn't I be using that? Now, the journalist's report was that whilst it did boost range by 75 miles, the Corsa was so slow and unresponsive that he really wouldn't recommend that setting. Now, we must also account for the differing energy demands of the seasons. In the winter, BMW estimate the Mini electric range is reduced from 140 miles to 120 miles due to the extra demands of heating and other winter ancillaries. Now, summer driving, even when using air conditioning, doesn't have quite such a drain. So when you purchase an EV, manufacturers offer the option of different capacity batteries, which can give greater range. But Steve, I've got a question for you now. What do we do regarding accessing charging networks if we go on a longer journey to visit family and friends? Now, I live in Cheltenham, and every couple of months I visit my uncle who lives outside Winchester. It's a 180-mile round trip, and he doesn't have a home charging point. So how do I plan for that?
Well, Nigel, that's where we need to look at a less well-known aspect of EV driving, which is the motorway cruise penalty. Driving really fast does gobble up power. If we bring back the chart you showed earlier and add another 2 columns, we can see the cruise penalty of motorway driving and its effect on EV range. So unless you're driving something like a Tesla, you'd have to plan to recharge when visiting your uncle. Although I don't want people to get disillusioned by that, because there are more and more cars coming on the market now with 300-mile range. I personally drive a new Ford, which has a 350-mile range, 350 in the real world. And my wife drives a Hyundai Kona, and that's 300-mile real world range. So there's more coming through. The good news as well is that the charging network is rapidly expanding with a convergence of both public and private investment to create the infrastructure we ultimately need. When I started driving 10 years ago, there really were hardly any charging points. They're pretty much all over the place now, although we still are getting more sites up and running. Another factor of EV ownership, it's essential to have a smartphone or a sat-nav in the vehicle. There's data from a company called Statista that indicates a third of those over 65 do not have a smartphone. So maybe that is another technology that you'll need to engage with. Using either the smartphone or the sat-nav, I think, is really important. The reason I talk about it for smartphone is there's an app. An app is a tool that runs on a smartphone for longer journeys that gives you access to a complete list of all the charge points. And one of the best apps to do that is an app called ZapMap. It gives you locations of all the charge points, what they charge in terms of cost as well as speeds, and lets you help plan your route. As you look at traffic reports prior to setting off on your journey, also note where you plan to take a break and recharge. You don't need a full charge, you only need as much as required to get to your destination, if you can charge at your destination. With this, you can also check if you had to download another app to use the charging point at your chosen location, because at the moment that is a problem. You need different apps and different payment methods for the different charge points. But I'm happy to say that government has now mandated they all have to take contactless debit or credit cards. Almost all of them now are already doing that. They don't like American Express though, but they'll take a Visa, MasterCard, anything standard. In planning a longer journey, I'd always recommend you always allow sufficient battery charge to be able to drive on to the charging point after the one that you need. So if there's any issues at your first charge point, if it's in use, you can move on to the second one without worrying. Most motorway service stations now are equipped with rapid charge points, which the majority of EVs can accept. Most EVs can be rapid charged from almost empty, 10%, to almost full, 80%, in around 30 to 35 minutes, which is great timing to have a coffee and a snack and stretch your legs. Some of the premium EVs come with higher capacity 800 volt systems, which allow even faster charging speeds. You can get a full charge on some of them in about 12 to 15 minutes. And that is going to appear on more and more vehicles. The latest Hyundai and Kia have that capability built in. As I said, contactless payment is now mandatory, but remember that motorway charge points do cost significantly more than home charging. It's always best, if you can, to charge at home or charge in the workplace. A lot of people have got workplace chargers. Maybe you're also concerned about what happens if you get stuck in a traffic jam. Well, it's not a problem, and I speak from experience, having been stuck in far too many traffic jams. Which research simulated a Volkswagen EV stuck in a traffic jam, running the air conditioning at maximum setting, streaming music, with video being played in the back seat, plugged into a USB port, so you've got your kids in the back. After 75 minutes, the battery had only consumed 2% of its power. So you could pretty much sit there for a week without discharging your battery, with all the heating on, waiting in a traffic jam. Lord help us if it's a traffic jam that bad. A further reassurance concerning longer journeys is that breakdown services such as the RAC and the AA now have vehicles equipped to provide a mobile power boost if an EV runs out of charge. This power boost of up to 10 miles enables an EV to get to a charging point, because normally within 10 miles, you'll find a charging point. In that context, another difference is EV ownership is not all EVs have a neutral mode in their drive controls, neutral on the gearbox, so to speak. If this is the case, the vehicle can't be towed, as it would burn out energy regeneration system. Therefore, recovery vehicles either have to top them up or make a recovery via a low loader or an all wheels up recovery service, such as that run by the RAC. But I have to say, in 10 years, over 10 years, and 250,000 miles, I've never once run out of charge. You know how many miles there are left because your dashboard tells you, so you can plan for it. If you're in an area with very limited charge points and still have anxiety, that's when a battery hybrid electric, a plug-in hybrid electric might be worth considering. But I have to say, I'm not a fan unless you're really worried about it. Battery hybrids need more regular recharging to ensure they run on electric power as often as possible to achieve the low emissions and running costs, because otherwise you're effectively using a petrol engine or even a diesel, worst case. BHEVs, battery hybrids, still incur higher servicing costs, as they do have, as well as the electric motor and the batteries, that conventional fossil fueled engine. So you've effectively got two engines and you still have the running costs of that engine if you're using it, and the maintenance. Another point to mention here, though, is if you're amongst the towing fraternity, very few electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles, have been approved for towing. So in that case, you'll probably need to choose a plug-in hybrid EV. Using an EV not approved for towing could be seen by police as using a vehicle in a dangerous condition, with a significant fine, £2,500, and penalty points on your license. So just avoid that. Watch out for it. If you buy an EV to tow, make sure it's got the right towing capacity. And a lot of the new Volkswagens and Fords, Kias, etc., have got a reasonable towing capacity, but just be careful, check. In wrapping up this section, in the Volvo research Nigel mentioned earlier, 65%, 2/3 of drivers still had range anxiety when they first purchased their EV. But after a couple of months, they realized it's just not a problem. That worry fades away. So Nigel, what about concerns about overall battery life? Can you talk us through that?
Absolutely. The Admiral research that we've been referring to again also revealed that 31% of motorists identify battery condition as one of their top concerns in buying a second-hand EV. Now, in the early days of EVs, this was a genuine concern, as lithium-ion batteries are sensitive to heat, just like the batteries in our smartphones and laptops. Now, the first generation of Nissan Leafs did not have an active battery temperature management system, and this did result in rapid degradation of the batteries. Now, this has not proved the case with second generation EVs, which now have this system. So how have these batteries been faring? Well, an example of how effective they are is the Tesla S owned by a gentleman called David Bradford. Now, David in 2014 became the first licensed EV taxi driver, and since then has driven 200,000 miles. And Tesla's sustainability report is their batteries retain 80% of their capacity at this mileage. Now, this confidence is echoed by other manufacturers who provide long-term warranties, typically 8 years or 100,000 miles. And to complement the manufacturer's existing battery warranty, the RAC launched in July an EV warranty for any EV up to 8 years or 80,000 miles on all the other aspects of EV technology. Now, if you're buying an EV secondhand, most now have a display that indicates battery charging capacity, just like a smartphone. Dealers can also provide this data through the vehicle's diagnostic systems. But some other tips for maintaining battery life are, like your smartphone, don't allow your battery to discharge completely. So if you're leaving an EV parked up for an extended period, make sure it is left on charge. EVs also don't like extreme heat. So on a hot day, try and park it in the shade. Now, the leading car magazine, Autocar in June, also drew our attention to battery repairs. And what they said was, ignore scare stories about having to splash out thousands on replacement batteries, since it's possible to buy replacement cells for a few £100 that will replace charge capacity. So in the final analysis, while EV batteries will degrade in time, they'll probably outlast the life of the car. Now, even after an EV battery reaches an end of life for EV usage, it still has a value in being repurposed for use for other electric storage requirements. So we've now covered the 4 main areas of concern about EV ownership: high cost of purchase, range anxiety, charging point access doubts, and battery life concerns. So what we're now going to do is turn our attention to the EV driving experience and take you through some of the new technologies and unique EV qualities that you'll encounter driving these vehicles. And in doing so, Steve will share tips from his extensive EV driving experience. So off we go for our drive. Now, when you first get in an EV, one of the first things you'll notice is the interior is dominated by a large touchscreen with few control buttons. Now, this touchscreen gives access to most of the car's systems through a variety of menus and sub-menus. And this gives the driver and passengers the ability to customize settings in their car to a level never previously possible. This includes different driving modes, which we've mentioned before, to adapt the car to the driving conditions. And what's rather fun, there are even cosmetic features like changing the color of your interior lighting. Did you know you needed that? Now, it also allows the driver to balance the car's systems in terms of power usage to maximize the EV range. And this is particularly helpful, as we just heard, in winter and summer driving in the extremes. But however, there are challenges of this touch screen menu approach, particularly in the early months of ownership, when the driver is less familiar with the system, and is the potential distraction of having to look at the screen for longer periods of time when driving. Recent research revealed 55% of drivers over 55 think touchscreens make a vehicle more complex. A similar proportion, 50%, think touchscreens are more distracting. Steve, what's your advice?
Thanks. The first advice I can give you is that your comfort in operating the touchscreen menu system should become one of your key criteria in selecting which EV you want. There are a few that actually don't have touch screens or don't rely on them as much. They have more traditional layouts and cockpits, but the majority seem to be going this way, and some of them are really well designed. Different manufacturers have different approaches. Some are far better than others. I personally find the Tesla system quite distracting. I really like the Ford and the Hyundai systems, but it's a case of finding what you're comfortable with. If you don't find the system intuitive, or if it's slow to respond, like maybe a Jaguar system on the first generation, it could become a potential distraction and even a hazard whilst driving. When you read EV's press reviews, or ask owners' experience, or look at online forums, look out for what they have to say about the touchscreen software. Then when you go and look at an EV, ask the sales consultant or current owner to spend some time in showing you how it works. Not the fancy bits about changing color displays, etc., which are nice to have, but not really core. It's about how it is to use it for normal driving. When you take delivery, you've then got to devote a bit of time to become familiar with the system. It will take a few moments. Allow a half hour or an hour, and be prepared to learn something new. Once you've learned it, you'll actually find it's so easy you wouldn't want to go back. It includes presetting the systems, because there's lots that you can customize, which you can set up before driving. I wouldn't want to advise you to do it whilst you're driving, because that's going to distract you. There are constant improvements in voice-activated controls, which will eventually remove many of the current distractions with touchscreens. When I get into either of my cars, I just say, drive me home, and the sat nav automatically gives me the directions to drive home. I can say, set the temperature to 23, and it does that. I don't need to take my eye off the road. I don't need to train it to my voice. It just knows. So to repeat, make sure you investigate the intuitive use and speed of the system fitted to whatever car you're looking at as part of your key selection criteria. Have a play.
Okay, so you've now familiarized yourself with the controls and it's time to set off on a drive. Now, if you've only driven a manual before, this is where you make the transition to driving an automatic, as EVs are only automatic. Now, for most drivers, this transition is straightforward, but for some, retraining muscle memory from 3 to 2 pedals is more challenging, as is evidenced by the number of pedal confusion accidents. Now, Japanese brands such as Toyota and Subaru are taking the lead, introducing technology to mitigate pedal confusion scenarios, but training is a key to a safer transition. But Steve, what else do we have to think of in terms of this automatic drive mode?
With the growing experience of EV driving, what you'll learn is, for the majority of driving, you've only got to use one pedal. You use the accelerator. But when you want to slow down, you just lift off that accelerator pedal, and the regenerative braking system that we referred to earlier automatically slows the car down without you needing to even touch the brake pedal. You only need to brake if you need to brake heavily. On some EVs, you can actually adjust the degree of braking the system provides. That regenerative braking captures the kinetic energy, which actually charges the battery. And it's a great way to get extra range. To get the greatest regenerative benefit is slow down well in advance and drive gently, plan ahead. It's good driving. It sounds a bit complicated, but in actual use, it's really straightforward. You just use your right foot on the one pedal as a speed control. Go faster, go slower.
So you now set off on your drive and you press the accelerator. Wow. As we mentioned before, the instant torque of an electric motor means they offer a straight line performance is often comparable to a sports car. Now, whilst this makes EVs great fun to drive, for older drivers with slower reactions or mobility issues, this could introduce a risk, particularly in maneuvering near other vulnerable road users in places such as supermarket car parks. Steve, what's your advice?
Well, fortunately, manufacturers are conscious of the different ways that EVs drive, and they've got the facility to set up in the settings that I mentioned earlier on, different driving modes just by pressing one button. Some of the modes can soften the throttle response and make for a more gentle acceleration, a more leisurely experience. And actually, that's really nice to drive.
So the next thing you're going to notice is how quiet the car is. Now, whilst this makes the car very relaxing, it does mean other road users may not be so aware of your presence. So on rural roads, you need to pay particular attention to other vulnerable road users, such as horse riders and cyclists. And in urban areas, there are then pedestrians, and particularly us older pedestrians. 75% of the over 70s have poor hearing. There are also those with impaired eyesight. Steve, what do we need to think about here? Well,
what you need to ensure is that the EV you're considering is fitted with an acoustic vehicle alert system, AVAS. This has been a legal requirement on all electric and hybrid cars since July this year. Not all the older EVs have such a system, but the majority do. The way the system works is up to just under 20 miles an hour, depends on exactly which manufacturer. The vehicle emits a synthesized noise to warn other road users of the vehicle's presence. That might come as a surprise. It might come as a surprise. The reason AVAS doesn't function above those speeds is actually most of the noise comes from tire noise, even more than comes from engine noise. So at higher speeds, there's not really much difference between EVs and petrol engine cars in terms of road noise for somebody outside. Inside, you do notice a lot of silence. What we also need to ensure is that the AVAS is always turned on in urban environments, so people do hear you at those very low speeds. There is a facility in some cars for the driver to turn it off, which car engineers think might be of value, but I would advise against using it.
Okay, so as you drive, you're going to start to get acquainted with the numerous advanced driving systems that EVs are equipped with. Now, as we heard earlier, Steve has further expertise in this area, being part of a consumer test group who assess how these systems are calibrated for road use. So please, Steve, could you give us the key principles about the use of these systems?
Yeah, I love that diagram, by the way. It shows the way the car is scanning ahead rather than just your eyes. The first principle is to understand every system has a specific purpose for different driving scenarios. It's really important that we understand these to avoid any misunderstanding, as that could increase risks. An example of such misconceptions is ABS, anti-lock braking system. Many people think this is designed to reduce stopping distance in wet or low friction road conditions. It's not. It's designed to prevent the wheels locking to help maintain steering in an emergency maneuver, and all your cars have it. If you've ever braked really, really hard, you may have felt the brake pedal pulsing. That might be the ABS cutting in. So you might notice it, just keep your foot on the brake. But it's a different way of driving, which we've all got used to because all our cars have ABS. The second principle is to understand how the systems are controlled so that we can make sure they operate as intended. The main control systems are front and rear sensors. They're typically fitted in the bumpers, and there's a forward-facing radar in the front grille normally. There's quite often a camera mounted on the top of the windscreen, and there are sensors in each of the wheels. It's worth noting that should you be unfortunate enough to have an accident, they always need to be recalibrated to make sure they work correctly. Now, a bit of a health warning, and I don't want to frighten you. ADAS is not foolproof. If you're driving in snow, the radar detector and camera could be covered by slush or snow, meaning that they no longer work and you'd get a warning on the dash to tell you. So as a driver, you need to remain alert, but you may have to act. So rely on those systems, but be prepared to do something if you need to. They are safer. Nigel.
Okay, so what Steve and I are now going to do is we're going to take you through the main advanced driving systems that might be fitted to your EV. Now, I'll explain how they operate and their intended benefits, and Steve will then give advice on driver usage. Now, confusingly, the names of these systems is not consistent across manufacturers. Now, for this webinar, we're using the names given by the VW group, which includes Audi, Seat, and Skoda brands. So let's kick off with autonomous emergency braking, AEB. Now, this is being hailed as the most significant new safety feature since the seatbelt and will be a legal requirement on all vehicles sold from July 2022. Now, this system monitors the road conditions ahead for signs of a potential collision using a radar sensor in the front grille. It's then able to warn the driver of an upcoming danger, for example, a distracted pedestrian looking at their smartphone and stepping into the road, and then applying the brakes if the driver doesn't respond in time. Now, depending on the speeds involved, this system can significantly reduce the severity of an impact or avoid it altogether. Now, it also works when reversing at speeds up to 5 miles an hour. Steve.
Yeah, it's particularly helpful in urban driving when near other vulnerable road users. To ensure AEB operates correctly, you need to ensure that the radar is kept clear and not obscured. So actually driving a clean car helps. We need to be aware AEB can be triggered when maneuvering close to vegetation, such as on rural roads. Some vehicles give the owner the ability to adjust the sensitivity of the system to their own driving approach.
So us older drivers are encouraged to use motorways or dual carriageways as much as possible, as they're the safest classifications of roads. Now, for these driving scenarios, there are several systems that can increase driver confidence and safety. The first is particularly helpful for drivers who may have limitations in their neck movement. Now, this system is called blind spot monitoring, and this uses information from radar sensors in the rear bumper of the car of other vehicles traveling in the same direction in the next lane, which may be in the driver mirror blind spot. And this system then sends a warning by way of an indicator light in the exterior mirror. Steve.
With blind spot monitoring, you just need to take care that a vehicle approaching at high speed from behind may not get picked up by the sensors. So keep a regular check on your rear view mirrors, as you would normally, just to be aware of what's around you.
Now, blind spot monitoring is complemented by the next system, lane assist. Now, this alerts the driver if they're losing concentration and start to stray out of their lane. The system detects the white lines in the road and warns the driver if they're straying by a flashing light in the relevant wing mirror and giving a short vibration on the steering wheel.
With all these systems, they're designed to increase safety. But, and I stress this, drivers must maintain attention at all times. They're not robots that take control. You are responsible as the driver, but they help you and keep you safer.
Now, the next system not only helps reduce driving fatigue on motorways, but can also improve EV battery range. Now, this is called adaptive cruise control, ACC. This is a vast improvement on conventional cruise control, which we're aware a lot of drivers are not comfortable with. So this uses the front radar sensor of our car to automatically maintain a distance to the driver ahead. Now, this is one of the things that you preset before you set off on your drive. So it keeps the car at that distance without the driver having to press the accelerator or the brakes. And if the traffic ahead comes to a standstill, the system will also bring the vehicle to a halt.
My advice here is that the system is only for used on motorways and dual carriageways, because it's not designed to be used on two-lane roads with oncoming traffic, as that can confuse it. On motorways, ACC, Adaptive Cruise Control, is really helpful at maintaining a constant speed and a nice gap to the vehicle in front, especially with the use of average speed cameras. And I have to say, I would not buy a car without adaptive cruise control now. It is just brilliant for making long journeys relaxing.
Okay, next we have fatigue detection system, which is another reassurance on long journeys. Now, with this, an internal camera and infrared LED monitors the driver's eyes and head movement. And if it detects driver drowsiness, it provides a visual or auditory warning.
With any journey, and particularly if you've had less sleep than normal or a bad night's sleep, always ensure you plan to have a break every 2 hours. It's an opportunity to top up your EV battery if you need to, as well as grab a cup of coffee.
So many EVs also come equipped with intelligent LED headlights with a system called light assist. Now, these can increase older driver confidence in driving at night through improved visibility and reduced driver workload. Now, the latest systems are far superior to earlier versions, which created widespread concerns. LED headlights are made up of several elements which automatically adjust the headlamp beam to the vehicle loading and driving conditions. So this includes adjusting the spread of the light to provide the best lighting depending on whether on an urban, rural roads, motorways, and bad weather. The light assist aspect of the system is that it automatically dips the headlights when approaching or following another vehicle or entering an urban area.
I agree with Nigel. These systems really do turn night into day. You need to be aware that the light assist system doesn't function typically in some cars at under 20 or 30 miles an hour. So you may need to take over the headlight main beam function. Other fundamentals to aiding nighttime driving are to ensure your windscreen is clean inside as well as out. And if you wear glasses, consider having an anti-glare coating applied, which reduces the dazzle effect of oncoming traffic.
So when you get home to park, some vehicles are equipped with a parking assistant. Now this helps drivers park in either parallel or perpendicular parking and can be particularly helpful if a driver has any limitations in neck movement. The way the system works is that the driver activates the system, drives by the intended space. The system then identifies if the park space is suitable. The driver then takes their hands off the wheel as the system then takes over the steering to park the car. The driver, though, continues to operate the brake, accelerator, forward and reverse gear shift. Now, this might sound complicated in explanation, but I tell you, when you try it, it really is a breeze.
Yeah, no more hitting the curb with your wheels. It's fantastic. Finally, however intelligent these systems are, collisions still happen. This is where emergency call system could be a real lifesaver. It's triggered when an airbag or seatbelt tensioner is activated. It sends an automatic notification to the emergency services of an accident, gives details of its severity, the vehicle involved, and the location. You can also make a connection manually. For example, if reporting an accident that isn't too severe or one that you're not directly involved with, or calling for breakdown assistance. What EVs also brought to the mainstream is the introduction of new software-based operating systems with over-the-air updates. That means that all the systems of a car constantly get updated. More data is gathered around from the car manufacturers around accident prevention, and software algorithms improve. Excuse me. Manufacturers will also be able to offer, at an additional cost, new features for your car as they become available, such as augmented reality, heads-up displays and things like that. They can turn on or off those features if you pay an extra fee, if they've got them fitted, all that capability's in there. It's actually really, really good to get those over-the-air upgrades.
So what we've covered in this section is the main advanced driving assistance systems which are becoming mainstream with all cars. But you may also be encountering other systems that have been in cars for some time. Now this includes traffic sign recognition, which amongst other things will show you the speed limit or the road you're driving, a rear view camera, some of which have 360-degree coverage, and tire pressure monitoring, which alert you if a tire loses pressure. Now, all these systems make for easier and safer driving if we fully understand what they're designed to do and how to make best use of them. So the big question, how do we best prepare to make the transition to EV ownership and all these new technologies? Now, use of the internet is very helpful in this transition, which some might suggest is a challenge for us older drivers. But our experience at the forum is that this is a myth that has been dispelled during the COVID lockdown as our digital skills have improved in keeping touch with loved ones and increasing our use of online shopping. Now, whilst we all want to do our bit to make the roads safer and preserve the planet for our grandchildren, the first step in EV ownership, probably for most of us, is to answer the question, does this transition make financial sense? Now, as Steve suggested, this is a matter of comparing the like with like whole life ownership costs. So if you make the decision to proceed and have identified your budget, the next step is to decide which EV is for you. Now, like with any car purchase, there's a wealth of information available online from press, motor organisation and influencer reviews, including extensive video reports. And car brands are also putting out more and more tutorial videos online. But what I've found in recent years is one of the most valuable resources are owner online forums. Now, these contain insights from owners' experience and their dealings with the organizations from whom they acquire the vehicle. Now, my experience is these forums often reveal issues and solutions that even the car dealers are not aware of. Now, remember what Steve mentioned earlier, a key priority is checking the ease of use of the car's touchscreen menu system. And then once you've decided which EV is right for you, if you're buying new, in your negotiations, ensure clarity on what level of training will be provided with follow-up sessions if required. Now, if you're buying a second-hand car, consider going to a specialist EV retailer, many of whom even have more specialist EV knowledge than mainstream car dealers. They'll also offer specialized EV warranties. Now, when the vehicle is delivered to the dealership and is going through its pre-delivery inspection, or prior to collecting a second-hand car, ask to receive or download the car manual beforehand to give you as much time to familiarize yourself with the car's systems. Now, during my years working with car manufacturers, I was always impressed with the amount of work that went into writing these manuals and the gems of information that they contain. But so often, admit it, owners only look at the manual in an emergency. Now, in parallel with all of this, if it's possible, you'll be getting your home charger installed at the most economic electricity tariff. And you'll also be familiarizing yourself with your local charger network through apps like ZapMap. Then comes the happy day of collecting your EV and joining this new era of mobility. Now, if you have issues getting used to the new technology, use the owner forums to get advice. Also, maybe consider signing up for a driving assessment with organizations such as IMA RoadSmart. They will help you understand how to get the very best from your new car vehicle, as well as brushing up on your driving skills. So that's the theory. Let's hear about the reality. So Rich, tell us about your dad. I mean, first of all, how did you make the decision to go to an EV?
Well, my dad always liked my PHEV. When I drove a PHEV, I now drive a full electric vehicle, but he always loved it. And it was time, his old Zafira needed changing, so he decided to go for it. Yeah, so I mean, the biggest thing for him was, as you mentioned before, is going from manual to automatic. But in reality, you know, but in reality, it wasn't a problem in the end. And I think it's going to give him an extra few years or extra period of time on the road.
Fantastic. And what technology did you go for?
Yeah, well, he went for the plug-in hybrid. For my dad at that time, granted, the majority of trips he does are local, 2 miles here, 5 miles there, but he went for the plug-in hybrid, and he went for the Kia Niro plug-in hybrid, which he absolutely loves. He absolutely loves. I mean, the reason he went for the plug-in hybrid, he still does some long trips as well. He's actually off to Cornwall in a couple of weeks' time. So for him, you know, he's 80, but you know, that's for him. But by the way, he is now seriously considering getting a full EV at 8 years old. So I think he's going to go for it.
Oh, fantastic. So, Rich, as we're coming towards the end of our presentation, any final thoughts from your father? I can see the smile on his face. You were telling me about the smiles of all the EV owners that you put chargers in for.
Oh yeah, I mean, he loves it. I mean, one thing to make sure that all your the thing we got for him was a charge point fitted. So any of the people listening, if you're going to consider getting a charge point and the things involved. But yeah, the smiles, you know, the amount of people when I know they're going to go for a test drive in an electric vehicle, and I said to them, you will laugh, you will smile, you will absolutely love it. And they all do. Fantastic.
Thanks ever so much. Okay. So everyone, as we come to the end of our presentation, we appreciate we've shared a lot of information, but we really hope this has been helpful. As Rob said, during the next couple of days, a recording of this webinar will be posted on the forum's website for you to review and to check any salient points we've raised. Now, if you're viewing this webinar after our recording, and just to note, the recording was made in September 2021, please remember this is a fast-moving story and there are literally new developments happening every week on a weekly basis. So please check any facts you heard on this webinar before planning based on what you've heard. So, as well as doing our bit to preserve the planet for our grandchildren, electric vehicles offer numerous benefits to help keep older drivers driving safely for longer. What's vitally important is we do our research and preparation to transition safely to this new technology. So to conclude, each of us is now going to give one key piece of advice. Rich, put you on the spot first. What's your bit of advice?
Okay, well, my specialist subject are the home charge points and business charge points. So my key advice is when you're thinking of getting an electric car, equally parallel with that, think about getting your charge point, because your home may need adapted, your electrics may not be quite up to it. So get in back. The amount of people who ring me panicking because they're getting their car in a week and they haven't organised it. So allow plenty of time for that. And then, yeah, that's what my advice. And using
planning. Yeah, fantastic. Steve.
My one bit of advice is don't listen to the naysayers. It's a bit like listening to all those who said don't get a COVID jab. You'll find lots of advice out there, but really just try one. Take one for a test drive. I can almost certainly say you'll probably want one because the driving experience is so much nicer.
Oh, thanks, Steve. And my one bit of advice is go and talk to an EV owner. I've got friends who have them. I had, the first time I met Rich, a fantastic conversation with him. Talking with an EV owner, you can really find out all the kind of nuanced questions that will relate to your own situation. So really use that benefit. So I'm going to conclude with two final pieces of research. In ZapMat survey, 91% of EV owners said they would not go back to petrol. And in a very recent Which annual survey, EVs proved to be the most satisfying to drive. So Steve, Rich, thank you so much. It's been great fun working with you on this presentation. Thank you for all your time that you put into this. And out to all of you, I hope what you heard has been helpful. And now we look forward to taking your questions. Rob.
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much. If I just get you to end your presentation, that'd be fantastic. And we'll move back to a full screen then. Just let that happen. That's fantastic. I think we're all up in the gallery screen. We are. Right. We have, as you can imagine, been bombarded with questions. Some of them you've actually answered, so that's fantastic, but I will clarify some of them. I have to say, I've learned a huge amount from your presentation today. I found it very informative, very useful, and the best I've seen on anything to do with electric vehicles. So it's not really just useful for older drivers, it's useful for everyone really at the end of the day. So I hope many people pick up this presentation and watch it again. But like Nigel says, things are changing very quickly, so people need to be aware of technology changing and just check those facts. We did cover a few things. I'm just going to mention about some of the cost. Was a very popular question by many people concerned about the different things. And there was one thing saying some small EV cars are cheaper. That does not really help. We need to compare car size by car size and understand the electric vehicle comparative costs. Is there anything any one of you could answer?
Yeah, I'd comment on that. The first thing is a small EV has more space than a small petrol or diesel car. Because you've not got the motor, etc., you actually have a lot more space inside. They've quite often got a flat floor, and a lot more space for the driver, the passenger, and elsewhere. They might, however, have a smaller boot. Some of them have a little bit smaller boot because that's where some of the batteries are hiding. So it's something to watch out for. But in terms of overall costs, I think in the second-hand market, you will find that an EV compared to a similar sized fossil fuel vehicle is more expensive to buy. Equally, I think you'll find over the course of probably a year, let alone 3 years ownership, you're actually quids in, assuming you're doing a normal 10,000 miles a year, you're actually better off with an EV because you're not spending 50 or even £100 every time you fill up.
And the leasing, I might just add, the leasing now is comparable. And actually, for example, I think the Vauxhall Corsa is exactly the same price for leasing, because leasing requires the residual value of the vehicle after. So leasing is very cost effective for EV.
Great. Well, that's fantastic. A couple of other things, and I have to say, I've thought this myself. A number of people saying, with us transitioning to electric and using electric that much more, do we honestly think that the electricity substations and generating stations are going to be coping with this, especially into 2030, really? I mean, are we able to do that? Richard, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, a particular passion of mine. Yeah, no problem whatsoever. I've worked at the National Grid. There's going to be no problem with generation. In fact, sometimes there's going to be too much generation with all the renewables coming online. We are going to get some log jams at the last couple of miles. We work with the DNOs, so there are going to be situations when you get down to the actual street by street with the local DNOs, but there is definitely enough electricity. Too much.
Grand. Now, just bearing that in mind, that we are producing a lot more electricity, we've still got to create that electricity in the first place. So we're looking about saving the planet and doing different things. Are we concerned about creating more electricity with the generating stations producing more emissions themselves?
It's worth saying that in the UK, a huge proportion, and growing almost on a daily basis, is sustainable power. Wind or solar. We're fortunate to have one of the windiest countries with the longest shorelines in the world, and we're using that. If you look around as you're on the coast, you'll almost certainly see wind generation. So a lot of our power is coming from sustainable sources, and that is only increasing. That's good news. The other thing I'd point out, building on what Rich just said, is EVs aren't just not a problem. They're actually a solution to the problem. With wind power, it generates power day and night. But obviously, in the UK, a lot of our power is only consumed during the day. At night, it isn't. So to make use of it, we need somewhere to store it. It can be stored in electric vehicles. And with the new technology and the smart charges that are coming through, that power can actually be fed back to the grid in times of peak demand, so that a coal-fired station or gas power doesn't have to be turned on. And actually, they're therefore the solution, not the problem.
Great.
There's actually two trials at the moment, one with Octopus and one with, I'm not sure who other one, of that exact thing, V2G. It's called vehicle to grid. It's called social energy. Social energy. We use the vehicles and your home batteries to balance and power the grid. I find it really exciting.
Well, it looks like the technology is certainly looking at all these different factors and helping everything that we can about the environment. So somebody's put, I haven't got a garage, and I understand there is a considerable amount of theft of components or electric vehicles themselves, particularly with sort of Honda and Toyota cars. Are we aware of this, and what can people do about that?
Perhaps I can comment here. Yeah, this is the issue to do with catalytic converters on plug-in hybrids, and because they're running on electricity, these catalytic converters, which have all these precious metals, are a real target for the police. Now, in Gloucestershire, our constabulary has issued advice around that. You can get clamps, aftermarket clamps, that can make the catalytic converters less vulnerable for attack. And also there's clearly advice around where you park. But the car manufacturers are addressing this, and they are now designing the catalytic converters to be actually in a position where you cannot reach them from underneath. Steve, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, it applies to fossil fuel vehicles much more than plug-in hybrids. It's older cars and most petrol vehicles with catalytic converters are having a high incidence of this catalytic converter or exhaust theft.
Yeah.
Effectively, it's a component in the exhaust. I think with EVs, what you find is because of the technology that's built into them, they're actually, firstly, more difficult to steal. Secondly, they can be tracked. A car manufacturer has the ability to identify where a vehicle is and could, in theory, just turn it off. So I think you'll see the incidence of theft will be decreasing for EVs if it hasn't already.
That's really good to know, because one of the points was somebody's said with the touchscreens being very visible there, are they not going to be something which is attracted to thieves? I mean, if they stole them, would they be able to use them on something else?
No, they're coded to the vehicle, so you couldn't take a vehicle, a touchscreen out of one car and use it in someone else's or upgrade it. They need to be coded, and it's only the vehicle manufacturers that have the ability to do that. So I don't think that will happen.
And this may be one for Rich, really, about home security of charging points. You know, if it's outside, could someone come up and just plug into it and use it themselves?
No, you've got various locks. Some have actually got the old-fashioned key. The apps, no, you can control it. You can do what you want with it. You can lock it off. You can choose you can choose who's going to use that charge point. Yeah, no
fantastic.
Problem. But also in reality, no one's going to. It might happen, but I can't see it. I'm going to drive on your drive and sit there for 5 hours charging their car. But
I think
some people do worry about it. Some people do worry.
I think you'd notice it, wouldn't you? Someone parked in your drive.
Big massive car in your drive.
So somebody put, and this is really a good point, bearing in mind about worrying about the planet as well, and something myself, we're looking at buying an electric car. And in fact, to help with the system as well, we're looking at putting solar panels on ourselves for the house. How do you feel about putting solar panels in to help power your vehicles?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I've got solar panels, and there's a lot of charge points now that actually divert your exporting solar energy into your car. I've had lots of charge points on my house. I've tested them here. So the My Energy Zappy is the most popular one. And I've sat outside watching my screen and watching 2.5 kilowatts flow into my car from the sky. You know, I could watch it all day.
Yeah.
I've had 20 miles, 23 miles in my car. Yeah, 23 miles.
It's certainly the way to go forward, really, isn't it? Looking at doing that responsibility for all of us, really.
And it's getting cheaper as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone's put on here, someone's worried about the reliability and running costs of electric vehicles. We know that vehicles, you know, modern day normal combustion engines pack up various different things, bearings, brakes, suspension. What about with, is this worse or better with electric vehicles?
It's far better, much lower running costs. And you don't have an engine revving at huge numbers with oil and fuel flowing through it and carbon production on it, clogging up the exhaust, etc. You've got none of that. The electric motor has pretty much one moving part, and electric motors are incredibly reliable.
Yep.
You still do have the suspension and the other bits that you have in a normal car. So you still need those elements to be serviced. You still need brakes and brake pads. But it's interesting, we were talking earlier on about the one pedal regenerative braking. Brake pads on a normal car will last 15 to 30,000 miles, typically maybe a bit more if you're gentle. In an EV, they'll probably last 100,000 miles. You don't have a clutch. You don't have a gearbox. You don't have all those things that go wrong in cars. Just a simple electric motor. And they are incredibly reliable.
So bearing that in mind, what do we think about, you know, we've got an old classic vehicle. What about converting that to electric then?
I've just been to, last weekend was the big show, the EV industry, Fully Charged Live. I was down there, and you wouldn't believe the vehicles they converted. There was a Land Rover Defender, God knows what year it was. I think it was incredible. 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. They had old BMWs there, all sorts. And apparently it's going to be a booming market. Loads of VW campers. They've got the kits already. They've designed it now. So they're all these classics are going to get converted. It's going to get cheaper.
Yeah. And we've got another question, which I think is a popular one, with this sort of a transition that we're all having to make to electric vehicles in the future. Some people are having difficulty. For example, this person's put, I live in a flat with underground parking, but the landlord will not allow me to install a charging point or a 13-amp socket to allow overnight parking. Is there any way of persuading or forcing the landlord to get me permission?
There's no, sorry.
Go on, Steve, go on, you carry on.
There's no way of forcing them. I think any landlord that wants to behave ethically and morally and support sustainability would want to do it because it'll add to the value of the property. That's at this moment in time. Wouldn't surprise me if legislation changes to actually make sure that if someone wants one, they have to provide them, or that even if it's actually done proactively. Certainly the law's changing, so new houses have to have that. But the one thing I would advise anyone to do if they do live in a flat and can't come to an agreement with their landlord would be to contact your local council. Have a look at their website. Most councils have a section on their website where you can apply to the council to install on-street charging. Some of them have got very limited funds to do that, but where they have a list of people who've applied. So apply. And if you can get the council to put in a charge point, that will help. Although you don't need your own charge point. With the advent of more and more longer range vehicles that do typically now 200 to 350 miles on a single charge, many people only need to charge once a week, once a month even. And you can use the public charge points, the rapid charge points, where you can get a charge in half an hour, and maybe pop into that once a week or once a month.
Can I just quickly dive in? Can I just quickly dive in on that one? Interestingly, like I touched on earlier, this is exactly the reason why they're changing the grants. Like for God knows how long, I can't remember, Steve, I know it's at least 8 or 9 years, the standard grant's been going. But it's changing, and that's exactly the reason. For that exact person, that landlord who owns that apartment block, at the moment they're mentioning figures of £30,000, up to £30,000 per apartment block. So they are going to get help. It's for landlords, social housing, apartment blocks. So this is what we're going to go into next. We'll create the infrastructure in that apartment block. For example, we would put a dedicated, do the whole downstairs car park, EV ready or EV supplies. That's what I'm working on next, and that's the most exciting bit. But yes, you're right, Steve. You wouldn't go to the garage 5 times a day, would you? You go twice a week. So there is that as well.
Wow. Well, we've obviously we're in the start of this electric vehicle technology and moving ahead. And as you've said, Rich, it's only going to get better and better, more advantages, more places doing on-street parking with electric capability. So we can look forward to that. Richard, quite a few questions for you with your technology and technical input. Are charge points universal? If we have a couple of different EV makes, would we have to install 2 different charging points, or could we use the same one?
Good point, and I was going to touch on that earlier. So there was 2 types. You had what we call the Type 1 and the Type 2. Now, I used to have a Mitsubishi PHEV. That was the type. That is still a Type 1. The old Nissan Leafs pre-68s were a Type 1. Now, and a few other random ones, older ones, might have had a Type 1. Japanese. Now, all charge points will be Type 2. Even I've got a Tesla. Even that's got a Type 2 now. So any charge point you've got in your home will take the weird type. Any new car you will buy will have a Type 2 plug. So yeah, they are universal. And then the fast charging, you'll have a CHAdeMO, which the Nissan Leafs and the Mitsubishis, a CHAdeMO and a CCS on the rapid chargers. Again, you'll have both of those on when you go to a rapid charge, you'll have both of those. So don't worry.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And also, can we buy a 7.4 kilowatt home charger with 2 outlets, giving about 3.6 kilowatt hours each, so we can charge 2 PHEV vehicles on cheap rate? Good
point. I don't actually fit the doubles because they're not there. But what we do is what we call dynamic load balancing. So we can I've got 1 charge point. Apparently you can put 107 in line, and they'll share the same supply. You wouldn't do that. And then no house will be able to run unless you've got a big supply will run 2 full pair of charge points. So it's going to be, yeah, you share the load. Dynamic load balancing, it's called. Yeah, it's there now. We do it now. We do exactly that now.
Brilliant. And can I safely charge my e-car or hybrid from the domestic house electric system?
As in,
I should imagine a socket, I should imagine, yeah.
Yeah, but yes, you can. It still works. Like a lot of drivers who come to me and I'm panicking, I haven't got my charge point, I can't, I'm not in the car. It still charges. I don't think it's a good idea long term, because electrically you're putting the load in constantly in the plug. I think they charge it about 2 kilowatts. So it's a constant load, and that will be on all the time. It will 10, 20 hours. So not long term, not like they used to be when you have the smaller batteries maybe, but I don't think it's a good idea long term. And I'm not saying that because I installed the charge points. It's a good backup, but not long term.
Okay.
If I can add to that, Rob, if you're using one of the normal 3-pin sockets at home to charge, which most cars come with the adapter to do that, you'll add about 8 to 10 miles for every hour you're plugged in.
Right.
So for some of the more modern cars now, it will take you 30 to 40 hours before you get a full charge. That's a couple of days. That might be okay. But I would say if you can, take advantage of the fact that the government's giving you a grant of up to £350 and get a charge point if you've got somewhere that you can put it.
Yeah. Okay. So interestingly on here, and this is an interesting question someone's put forward. Do electric vehicles have a spare tire? Because apparently this person's read somewhere that jacking an electric vehicle could distort the chassis due to the battery weight, and it's not recommended. So how would you change your wheel?
Yeah, no, that's not right. It's no different to a conventional car. And actually the chassis on an EV is generally far, far stronger than it is on a conventional car. But in terms of the spare wheel, it has to be said that many motor manufacturers don't fit a spare tire to their petrol, diesel or EVs because it's an extra thing to carry around. It's extra weight, and that reduces whether it's the range of your EV or of your normal car. So they tend not to fit them. Some of them will sell them as an extra, but generally they'll fit a tire repair kit or an inflation kit, which will get you to where you're going. Or you can always call ROC, AA, green flag, etc. But it's no different to a normal car.
Okay, that's wonderful. And also, this is back to Richard a bit, really. What type and level of voltage is basically fitted to these cables that are going through? Are they safe if someone cut through them or something, or what happens in that?
Yeah, basically inside the cable, there's a control cable. So there's nothing going through that cable. So what happens is you plug the socket into the car recognizes, there's a charge point on the end of it. Yeah, I like that. And then it tells the charger to give it some electricity. And then there's electricity in there.
Right.
And then when it's in there, generally speaking, it locks in. It locks in both ends, so no one can mess about and pulling it out and things like that. So there's no electricity unless there's a car on it. So yeah.
Brilliant. That's wonderful to know. Okay, just a couple of things. I know we covered on ultra fast charging and things like that and battery degradation, but is it true that frequent ultra fast charging degrades the battery any faster?
It was with the very earliest cars on the market. It's not now. As we covered in the presentation, a lot of the batteries now are cooled. In fact, I'm not aware of any car on the market that doesn't have a cooled battery. And it's the cooling that means that they don't overheat. It's not like a mobile phone battery. If you plug in your mobile phone and charge it, you know your mobile phone gets hot. Those batteries will degrade over time quite quickly. They'll last a year or 3. The batteries in an EV typically have a warranty of 8 to 10 years, and they're actually designed to last 10 to 20 years. And that includes frequent, fast, rapid, or ultra rapid charging.
Okay, well, that's grand and good to know. Thank you. This is an interesting one. How much will the batteries reduce if the car is parked out in the sun in the morning? So will it make any difference? I'm guessing because they're talking about it heating up.
In my car, it automatically, you hear the air conditioning come on. So I think it cools it down it monitors the temperature of the batteries. I think I don't know too much about it, that side of it, but I think it manages itself. So you've got the cost of but I think it controls itself.
That sounds good. Okay.
Rob, that's reminded me of one thing that I think might be of interest. I find this really useful. I hate getting into a cold car in the morning or a hot car in the morning that's been in the sunshine or stuck in the snow. With an EV, most of them have the ability to actually control them remotely and turn the heating on or turn the air conditioning on, even turn on some of them the heated steering wheel and the heated seats on. It's a wonderful feature because you get into your car and it's ready to go. And even better than that, if you've been plugged in and charging at one of Rich's charge points or a normal charge point overnight, you're doing that using the power from your house. So you still have 100% of the range when you get into your car that's already toasty warm.
Yeah.
Cool. It's lovely.
That sounds good. Wonderful. It shows you how amazing technology is helping everything, really, isn't it? We're going forward. So what about driving in snow or ice? You know, what's the weight distribution? Do the vehicles, some of them or all of them, have four-wheel drive?
Mine's got my car's got all-wheel drive, but it's not my area of expertise. But my car happens to have all-wheel drive, but I don't think all of them do. I think Steve will know more about that than me.
Yeah, about half the cars on the market come with all-wheel drive on the electrics. The weight distribution on an electric car is much more centralized. It's 50-50, so they're really well balanced. They are a bit heavier, but a piece of advice that hopefully, Rob, Nigel, you'd agree with, for someone who's driving in snowy conditions, especially if they live in the north of the UK, is get cross-climate tyres.
Absolutely.
Forget four-wheel drive. Four-wheel drive and normal tyres is far inferior to decent cross-climate or all-year cross-climate tyres.
Yeah. Certainly something. My wife lives in Denmark and we travel back and forth to Denmark in the snow and always put winter tyres on, and it makes, wow, what a difference to the car compared to a normal set of tyres. So yeah, certainly something I'd recommend. Okay, we mentioned about towing here, and someone says, I very occasionally tow a small boat or trailer no more than 20 miles to and from my home. From what you've been said, is this something I won't be able to do with an EV vehicle then?
It depends on the weight of the boat that you're towing and the capacity of the car. You've just got to look at that online and see if the two match.
Yeah, it's a bit, it's like any car really. If you're going to tow something, you need to make sure that the weight is within the settings for the car and the gross vehicle weight allowed and the gross train weight or the towing weight that's allowed. So it's about looking in the book and seeing what you can tow and what you can't. So again, I'm afraid it is one of those things you'll have to have a look in your manual. Or speak to a dealership if you're looking at buying a vehicle. Right, so let's have a look. This is an interesting one. We were just talking before the webinar started about upgrades that suddenly come on your computers and what they can happen. Is there a concern that sometimes when you get these automatic upgrades on the computers in the cars, are they going to sometimes, have you had any problems where they've sort of locked the computer or had any problems with it? Or does it seem to be much easier than the upgrades you get on your computer and your phones these days?
Yeah, I've had my car 6 months and I've had about 4 upgrades, I think, in my car. And I had one actually 2 days ago. Do it in the middle of the night. It just works. So far, so good. Just works. So no problems whatsoever.
And I think manufacturers are doing, with software upgrades on fossil fuel cars. I mean, this is now part of, modern car technology. It's a very proven thing. Yeah.
And I think we've got a chance for one more last question, really, before we have to end today. So do you know what happens to the old batteries? We've seen these photographs of all these electric cars waiting there with the batteries and everybody saying what we're going to do to dispose them. Do we know what's happening with that? I know, Rich, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Funny enough, I've seen it firsthand. Some good friends of mine in Cheltenham, they run an EV garage and they've done about 20 old Nissan Leafs and they've taken the batteries out of them because the old first generation weren't that clever. So they've taken them out, replaced them, put them new batteries in or reconditioned batteries from old cars. They've revitalized those and they're now, so I've seen them big massive pallets of these batteries are going to be used for home storage.
Yeah.
The batteries will last the car, I think, threefold the new batteries.
Brilliant. Well,
Yeah,
I have to say
sorry,
today's, sorry,
Rob,
go on.
if I may, they're designed to be reused.
Yeah.
And home home battery storage is going to become much more popular, as I said, about balancing the grid and those initiatives. So that's one area that they can be used, and companies like BMW and Stellantis, which is Peugeot, Citroën, etc., are investing very heavily in that. But also there are new plants being built so that the batteries can be 100% recycled. That's what they're aiming for. In some areas, they're already delivering that.
Brilliant. So I just have to conclude today. We could go on and on, but thank you ever so much to everybody for this. We've had a brilliant presentation from yourselves today. I really want to say a big thank you to Nigel, Steve and Rich for their inputs today. It's been invaluable to us and really opened my eyes up to the electric vehicles, which I've been concerned about going to in the future. So something I'm seriously and will be doing in the future. So you've really, really helped. And I know certainly for the older drivers as well, it's been a big issue. So as Nigel said, this has been recorded. I will be putting this up hopefully by the end of tonight. It will be on our website under the Older Drivers Forum webinar page. You'll be able to find webinars that we've had pre-recorded. So this is a great one to go back to. But as Nigel says, we do always need to make sure we check the figures, especially when looking some weeks down the line when things start changing. At the end of the webinar, you'll get a short feedback survey here. So if I just ask you to complete that for us, just lets us know being planned for future webinars. Also, please have a chance. You'll be sent directly at the end of this to our Older Drivers Forum website as well. Please have a chance to explore the website. There's lots of useful information on there, not only past webinars, but also from renewing your license, medical conditions, various different videos, and lots of help and support. And really, we're a non-profit making organization. We're all volunteers, and we're here to just help you carry on driving safely for longer. So like I say, thank you ever so much for this. I'm really very pleased with our presentations done today. It's absolutely brilliant. If you're interested in any more webinars going on the rest of our week, please explore our website. So once again, I just say thank you very much for everybody and goodbye.